Hello! This will be a brief guide on how to get started with the interactive grading tool in LandArchTools for Grasshopper. First, make sure that your model is in meters, as the Grasshopper script will presume that the model is in meters and will not work otherwise. You can check that your model is in meters just by looking here. If it doesn't say meters, you can press this button here and it will change the model to meters. Just note that it won't actually scale your model, it will just change the units to meters. Secondly, if you look at the layers panel, you might notice that some of the layers have been created when you open the LandArchTools script. These layers are how we're going to pipe data to Grasshopper to form an interactive grading tool. And you can see those layers here, they'll all be bunched under GH. For grading, we'll be using the top three layers: GH grading boundary, GH grading points, and GH grading lines. First, double-click into GH grading boundaries. We want to draw a closed polyline, and you want to think of this line as the extent of grading that you'll be doing on your site at the point where you're tying into existing levels, and those levels aren't going to be changing. So to do that, and in this example, I'm just going to draw a random shape. Once that's drawn, you can see that Grasshopper has started to feed back information about our new tin, and in this case, everything is flat. But if you start to change the boundary levels, you can see that some information is starting to come through, like these contours here. And this sort of starts to form our interactive grading. You can see how this starts to become quite interesting, being able to pipe information into Grasshopper and then Grasshopper piping it out for quick analysis on your surface. You can see this grade here. So once you have your boundary defined, you will be using grading points and grading lines to define your newly graded landscape. So if you go into GH grading points, and if you draw a point inside of your Grasshopper grading boundary, you can see that these points start to define levels within your tin, and it starts to facet this surface to those levels. You can see at the moment the text for this tin is quite small. So you can go and fix that by just increasing the size of the text in the Grasshopper script. The next step is that you can control the tin using lines as well. So this is useful for strip drains or walls. And I'll show you how to do walls as well. So if you just draw in a line inside the boundary, you can see again that it starts to control and manipulate that tin surface. If you move it up, it manipulates that tin surface. A good tip is if you're doing walls, the way you model that basically is to draw your first line and then offset that line and then bring this line up to the top of the wall level. In that way you create a proper wall geometry. Obviously you would then cover this with your actual retaining wall element if you're modeling this just beyond doing level grading. So the last tip really is if you go into File, Properties, and then go into Modeling Aids, Nudge, if you copy these settings, these really allow you to have a really fine-grained, granular modeling experience with this. So if you've got a line that is close to where it needs to be, you can nudge that to where it needs to be by going page up, Control page up, or Shift page up, and that gives you really fine-grained control over the levels that you need. Of course, if you just need to move something into a certain level, you can go and use the elevator given object to a specific RL, click on it and say, oh, I want it to be 15, and that will move it straight into the 15 RL. So something really important to understand is what these numbers are actually referencing. And then in this case, you can see each triangle on this mesh has a grade in the middle of it. And this grade represents all grades that exist on this triangle. So that includes any crossfall that might exist along the major grade here. So that might come in when you start verifying the grades. You might think, this is a bit different to what I'm seeing in the grade, because you might just be calculating one grade across here, where this is actually calculating 2 grades. So one way you can get around that is, if you want to see just the single grade, those will only exist at the facet edges. So if you turn on line grades here, and if you just increase the size of this text so we can see it, these represent a single grade along those lines of the facet of the triangular facets. So lastly, once you've finished your tin, you can bake your contours, you can bake the gradients, bake the spot heights, bake the water, bake the tin. And if you're new to Grasshopper, baking just means that it's taking the ephemeral geometry that is inside Grasshopper and creating an actual geometry within Rhino. So you can see we can now actually click on that topography and play with it here, and you can see we have that little wall we created and all these spot heights that we did as well. And that about wraps it up. So I use this tool in my own work as a professional landscape architect. As always, I just put the warning in that you shouldn't be using this unless you know how to grade. If you got that basic understanding and training, this doesn't make you suddenly a grading superstar. You still need to know what to do. But it speeds up my workflow a hell of a lot. And I thought it'd be great to share it with a profession. Yeah, so if you got any questions, shoot me an email. I'm always happy to talk to people, and yeah, have a good day. Cheers.